I thought I knew my wife, 31 years of marriage, and I was certain I understood every corner of her. I was wrong about everything. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm 58 years old, a retired civil engineer from outside Columbus, Ohio, and for the better part of 3 decades I believed I had built something solid, a home, a life, a partnership with a woman I would have walked through fire for. Her name was Vivian. Not the Vivian from some story you've heard before. My Vivian. The one who used to leave coffee on my nightstand before I woke up. The one who cried at every single one of our daughter's school plays, even the bad ones, even the year our daughter forgot every line and just stood there on stage staring at the ceiling. That Vivian, the one I trusted with every password, every account, every quiet secret a man accumulates over a lifetime. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I remember because I was in the garage reorganizing a shelf of old hardware I'd been meaning to sort since Christmas. The kind of pointless task you invent for yourself in retirement when the days start running together. My phone buzzed on the workbench, and I almost didn't answer it. Unrecognized number, Columbus area code. I figured it was a spam call about my car's extended warranty. It wasn't. The woman on the other end identified herself as a branch manager at the downtown location of our bank, First Midland. We'd banked there for 22 years. She spoke carefully, professionally, but there was something underneath the professionalism, a kind of controlled urgency that made me put down the box of screws I was holding. "Mr. Aldred," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to understand this is not a routine question. Are you at home right now?" I told her I was. "And your wife, is she home with you?" I looked through the door into the kitchen. I could see the light on over the stove. I called out. No answer. I walked through the house and checked the bedroom, the back porch, the driveway. Her car was gone. She'd told me that morning she was visiting her sister, who'd been having some hip trouble up in Westerville. "No," I said, "she's at her sister's." There was a pause on the line. Not a long one, maybe 2 seconds. But it felt like standing at the edge of something. "Mr. Aldred," the manager said slowly, "your wife is currently in our lobby. She came in approximately 40 minutes ago. She's attempting to make a large wire transfer from your joint savings account. She has all of the correct documentation. She answered all of the security questions correctly." Another pause. "But she came in with a man, and that man, he presented himself as you." I didn't say anything for a moment. I actually looked down at my own hands, which sounds ridiculous. But that's what I did. I looked at my hands like I needed confirmation that I existed. "That's not possible," I said. "I'm standing in my kitchen right now." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm calling." Her name was Denise, the branch manager. I would learn that later. In that moment, she was just a voice. And that voice was telling me that someone was impersonating me in a bank lobby 3 miles from my house while my wife stood next to him. She told me the man had my driver's license, or rather, a license with my name, my address, my date of birth, but his photograph. He had a copy of our marriage certificate. He had the last 4 digits of my social security number, my mother's maiden name, the name of the street I grew up on, the make and model of my first car. Every single thing the bank uses to verify identity. "How much are they trying to transfer?" I asked. $240,000, she said. "To an account in Nevada?" That was nearly everything in that account. We'd spent 30 years building that. My pension contributions, my wife's inheritance from her father, the money we'd set aside when we sold the house in Bexley and downsized 6 years ago. $240,000. "I'm calling the police," I said. "I've already called them," Denise said. "They're on their way." "But Mr. Aldred, I'm asking you to come in, because I need you to be here when they arrive, and I need you to see this for yourself." I drove those 3 miles in something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anger. It was closer to the feeling you get when a doctor's face changes in an exam room, and you understand, before a single word is spoken, that something is very wrong. I pulled into the parking lot and sat in the car for 30 seconds. Through the glass front of the branch, I could see people moving around inside. Normal Tuesday morning at a bank. Tellers at their stations. A couple of customers in chairs near the door. And then I saw her. My wife was seated at a desk near the back. She was wearing the blue cardigan I'd given her 2 birthdays ago. Her hair was the way she always wore it. She was leaning forward slightly, talking to someone across the desk, and everything about her posture was relaxed, comfortable, the posture of someone who believed everything was going according to plan. I went inside. The moment she saw me come through the door, her face went pale. Not the pale of someone surprised, the pale of someone who has just watched a plan collapse in real time. Her hands, which had been resting on the desk, came together in her lap, and she pressed them there like she was trying to keep them still. The man sitting across from her, the one presenting himself as me, had his back to the door. He turned around when he heard the commotion near the entrance, and I looked at his face, and my brain simply refused to process what it was seeing. He looked like me. Not vaguely. Not in the way that strangers sometimes resemble each other in a certain light. He looked like a version of me. Same height, same build, same gray at the temples. The nose was close. The jaw was close. His eyes were the same shade of brown. He was wearing a jacket similar to one I owned. I stood there and I looked at this man, and I thought, for one genuinely disorienting moment, that I was looking at a photograph of myself that someone had taken without my knowledge. 2 police officers came to the door behind me 45 seconds later. What happened next unfolded the way things do when a situation has already been decided. The man, whose name I would later learn was not my name, was detained. My wife stood up from the chair and started to speak, and one of the officers asked her to sit back down, and she did. She looked at me once. Just once. And what I saw in her eyes in that moment was not guilt exactly. It was something colder than guilt. Something that looked almost like calculation. Even now, even as everything fell apart around her, some part of her mind was still running through options. I drove home alone and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The detectives came to the house that afternoon. A man named, well, it doesn't matter what his name was. He was patient, thorough, the kind of investigator who lets silence do the work. He asked me questions for nearly 2 hours, and I answered all of them. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I began to understand the shape of what had actually been happening in my life. It had not started with a wire transfer. It had not started recently. The detectives had already, in those few hours, begun pulling threads, and what they found beneath the surface of my marriage was something I still have trouble laying out in order without feeling like I'm describing someone else's life. The man in the bank was not a stranger. He was my wife's nephew, the son of her youngest brother. I had met him, I realized, twice, at a family gathering 4 years ago and at a funeral 2 years back. He was in his early 30s. What I had not known, what no one had apparently mentioned to me, was that in the year before that wire transfer attempt, he had undergone a significant amount of cosmetic work. A rhinoplasty. Work on his jaw. His hair had been dyed and cut and styled to match photographs of me that my wife had presumably been providing over time. She had been building this, quietly, patiently, for more than a year. The detectives found a second bank account I hadn't known about, in my wife's name only, at a different institution. Over the preceding 14 months, small amounts had been moving out of our joint checking account through a series of transfers that individually looked like nothing. 100 here, 80 there, the kind of thing that disappears into the noise of daily transactions. In total, she had moved just under $19,000 into that account without my knowledge. The wire transfer, the $240,000, was supposed to be the final move. I sat with that for a long time. 14 months. She had been planning this for 14 months while we ate dinner together, while we watched television in the same living room, while she left coffee on my nightstand in the mornings. My daughter found out 2 days later when I finally managed to call her. She drove down from Cleveland with her husband, and the two of them sat with me in the living room, and I told them everything I knew. My daughter, she's 34. She has 2 kids of her own and a composure that has always made me proud, held it together for most of the conversation and then went into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and I could hear her crying quietly in there. Thinking I couldn't hear, her husband stayed on the couch next to me and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. In the weeks that followed, as investigators dug further, I learned more. I wish I could say that learning more made it easier, but it didn't. It just made the shape of the thing clearer, and clarity in this case was its own kind of wound. My wife had a life insurance policy on me. I had known about it. We had policies on each other, taken out years ago, standard for a married couple. What I had not known was that she had increased the payout on mine without telling me. This required my signature on the paperwork. The signature she'd obtained, I later realized, was on a document she presented to me as something else entirely. A form related to our vehicle insurance, she'd said. I had signed it at the kitchen table with my reading glasses on, and then gone back to whatever I'd been watching on television. The policy paid out $450,000 in the event of my death. Accidental death paid double. I'm not a man who frightens easily. I spent 30 years in engineering, managing projects and timelines and variables, staying calm when things went sideways. But sitting in a detective's office and hearing that detail, the accidental death clause, the signature I hadn't known I was giving, I felt something that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like vertigo. The sensation of looking down and realizing the ground you thought you were standing on was never there. I started going back through the previous year in my mind, the way you do, searching for moments that looked different from where I was standing now. There was a night last autumn when I'd had some kind of stomach trouble after dinner, bad enough that I'd spent most of the night on the bathroom floor. I'd assumed it was the salmon we'd had. I had not considered any other explanation. I didn't know then what I know now, and I'm not going to claim certainty about what that evening was, because I don't have it. But I know what I wonder. There was an afternoon in late January when I'd been working on the gutters, and a section of the ladder had given way. I'd caught myself on the edge of the roof and come down shaken but unhurt. The ladder was old. These things happen. But I thought about that afternoon differently now, and I didn't like where my thoughts went. I don't know the full plan. I'm not sure the investigators ever fully reconstructed it. What I know is that my wife and her nephew had apparently discussed in a series of text messages that were eventually recovered from his phone, a scenario in which I would not be alive to notice the missing money. The wire transfer wasn't meant to be a parallel plan to my death. It was meant to come after. At some point, that order had shifted. Maybe they'd grown impatient. Maybe the opportunity for the transfer had appeared earlier than expected. Whatever the reason, they'd moved on the bank before whatever the other thing was supposed to be. And Denise at First Midland had noticed something off about the man across her desk and had trusted her instinct enough to make a phone call. Denise, who I've since sent a card to and who I will be grateful to for the rest of my life, had noticed that the man claiming to be me seemed not to know certain details that she expected me to know. Small things. The name of the banker who'd handled our account for years, the approximate date we'd first opened our accounts there. Things that a spouse might not know. Things that a man impersonating a husband might not have been given. She hadn't been certain. She had only been uncertain enough to pause, and that pause saved my life. My wife was arrested on charges that included fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and, this one took time for me to fully absorb, solicitation to commit murder. The nephew was charged alongside her. The money that had been moved to the separate account was recovered. The wire transfer had never gone through. My daughter was at every court date she could manage. Her husband drove her when she needed it. They were good to me in that period, in the way that people are good to you when everything else has failed, quietly, consistently, without making a production of it. I moved through the legal process the way you move through any long ordeal, one step at a time, not looking too far ahead, trusting the people around me who knew what they were doing. I had a good attorney. I had the detectives who were patient with my questions and honest about what they knew and didn't know. I had my daughter. I did not have what I had built for 31 years, and I was not always sure how to stand up straight without it. There were mornings in that period, I won't pretend otherwise, when I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold and I just could not find the forward direction. The shape of the days I'd known was gone, and the new shape hadn't arrived yet, and I was somewhere in between, where the ground is uncertain and the light is strange. But I got up every morning, I made the coffee, I sorted the garage, I called my daughter, I did the things that keep a person in motion when motion is all you have. The trial, both trials, technically since they were tried separately, took most of the following year. I testified. Standing up there and answering questions while my wife sat at a defense table 15 feet away from me was one of the stranger experiences of my life. She did not look at me very often. When she did, her expression was composed in a way that I recognized. It was the face she made when she was managing something, organizing her thoughts, staying ahead of a situation. Even then, even there, she was sentenced to 11 years. Her nephew received 8. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I might feel when the sentences were handed down. I felt something flatter than that. The satisfaction, I think, is not in the verdict. It's in the surviving. It's in the fact that I am here to see it, and she is not wherever she thought she'd be by now. There are things I tell people when they ask me what I learned from all of this, and I'll say them here because I think they're worth saying. Set up a separate account just for yourself that no one else can access. Review your insurance policies personally, not just your signature on them. Be the one who calls the bank to verify whenever someone presents paperwork for your accounts. And when someone in a professional capacity, a banker, a doctor, a lawyer, pauses and asks you a careful question, pay attention to that pause. There's usually something in it. The other thing, the harder thing, is this. The person most likely to hurt you in a way that cannot be easily undone is not a stranger. It's someone who knows your security questions, someone who knows where you grew up and what you named your first dog and the make and model of your first car. That knowledge is not inherently dangerous. Most of the people who hold it will never use it against you. But when someone does, the damage runs all the way down. I'm still in Columbus, still in the same house, which surprised me a little. I thought I might need to leave it, that it would feel wrong. But it doesn't feel wrong. It feels like mine. I refinished the deck last summer. I got a dog, which my daughter has been pushing me toward for years and which I should have done sooner. He's a 7-year-old beagle mix named Gerald. Yes, I named him after a president nobody talks about anymore. That's the kind of man I am, and he sleeps at the foot of my bed and has opinions about squirrels that I find genuinely admirable. My daughter comes down with the grandkids most months. The house is louder than it used to be, in the good way. I'm 59 now. I've got, if things go normally, another 20 or 25 years ahead of me. I do not intend to waste them. I thought I knew my wife. I was wrong. But I'm alive to be wrong about it, and that, in the end, is the only answer to the question that matters. I keep coming back to one moment. Not the courtroom, not the arrest, not even standing in that bank lobby and seeing my wife's face go white when I walked through the door. The moment I keep returning to is sitting at my kitchen table that same afternoon, the house quiet, a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, trying to figure out which version of my life had been real. That's the part nobody warns you about. The inventory you have to take afterward, going back through 31 years and deciding what was genuine and what was performance. It's exhausting in a way that doesn't have a clean name. But here's what I've come to understand, and I don't say this lightly. What happened to me was not random. It followed a logic, even if that logic was cruel. Vivienne built something in the dark for over a year, quietly, patiently, piece by piece, and the weight of it eventually became more than she could hold in place. The lie got too large, and large lies have a way of requiring bigger and bigger structures to support them until one ordinary Tuesday morning, a bank manager notices something slightly off about the man sitting across her desk, and the whole architecture comes down. That's how it works in my experience. Not in some mystical sense, just practically. The bigger the deception, the more points of failure it creates. Denise didn't catch a criminal mastermind. She caught a plan that had stretched itself past the point where it could hold. What I've had to sit with, and this took longer than I'd like to admit, is my own part in the conditions that allowed it. Not the crime. That was Vivienne's doing, and I refused to carry guilt for what she chose. But I had stopped paying attention in the way a man should pay attention to his own life. I signed documents without reading them. I trusted without verifying. I told myself that paying attention was the same thing as suspicion, and I was too proud to be suspicious of my own wife. That pride cost me almost everything. The intelligence required to survive something like this is not complicated. It's not about being cynical or treating the people you love like suspects. It's about staying awake, knowing your own accounts, reading what you sign, understanding that trust, real trust, is not the same as willful blindness. I have confused the two for a long time. And the getting up. The part that comes after the verdict, after the house goes quiet, after your daughter drives back to Cleveland and you're just a 58-year-old man with a beagle and a refinished deck, that part is a choice you make every single morning. Not once. Every morning. There were days in that period when I didn't feel like making it, and I made it anyway, because the alternative was to let what Vivienne had tried to do finish the job she hadn't managed to complete. I wasn't willing to give her that. I stood in my living room. My nephew stood in my living room and told me the bank was foreclosing on my house next me.